Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here to share a little bit about our project that we've got going on in D.C. Really got started a little over 5 years ago. It was in November of 2009 when we bought our first artifact. And so this has been a very fast 5-year journey, and so we're going to be covering it pretty fast as well. There's really been, from that collection, 4 initiatives, 4 legs, 4 pillars that we that have developed from that. The museum is what got it started, but then we have some traveling exhibits, then research and education, and I want to just kind of walk through each of those. The first one I want to talk about is research. We had a lot of items within the collection that had never been studied or published, and some of it needed further study. And we started engaging professors and scholars all over the world to help us study some of these artifacts. Today we have over 100 professors that we have engaged at over 50 universities. And this is an example of one of them. This is what's called a Codex Climicii Rescriptus. It is a document that we acquired from Cambridge. And what we're interested in is the underlying text, because underneath was this, much of this document was scripture in Palestinian Aramaic. This would be the largest portion of scripture known in Palestinian Aramaic, which would be the closest language to what Jesus himself would have spoken. So it had been studied, I believe it was in the 40s, and since then, new technology has been developed that can help pull out some of that underlying text better than what could have been seen in the 40s. And so we've taken it to Oxford, where new scanning technology would scan it under different stops on the light spectrum. So it had been scanned, each leaf has been scanned. There's about 140 leaves that this document represents. This is an example of a before and after of those scans. So what happens is the top text has disappeared and what is underlying has popped out with those scans and some computer enhancements. And so we're taking those scans back to Cambridge to let scholars there do the translation work on that. So this is just one example of over 100 that may be going on at any one time, research that is going on within the collection. And this particular initiative, this particular leg or pillar of the collection really undergirds everything else that we do, because we want scholarly credibility in what we do, in everything that we do. So the research is a very significant and important part of the 4 different initiatives. The second one we talk about is the exhibits. Because we knew the museum was going to be several years off, we didn't know when it was going to happen, but because it was going to be several years off, we wanted to start telling the story that the collection told. We didn't buy the collection that we had because we're per se collectors. It was sitting in our closet and we were itching to tell its story. So we decided to develop a traveling exhibit called Passages. So the first artifact was bought in 2009, and it was in 2010 when we decided to open up a traveling exhibit in 2011, celebrating the 400th anniversary of the King James Version of the Bible. That exhibit is called Passages, and this is the shot of what it looked like in Colorado Springs. It doesn't look like that today because we don't have all the scrims up to make it look like this Roman facility, but it really looked pretty impressive there in Colorado Springs. About 40,000 square feet of display space, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say what you can see in the Passages exhibit, the 400 items there, to see the equivalent, you would have to travel the world. There are items here that are one of a kind. A letter from Martin Luther. We have a letter from Thomas Jefferson. We have portions of Dead Sea Scrolls, 1611 King James Bibles, and the list is 400 items long. Now, you could potentially go to somewhere and see more. The problem is, the chance of you getting the keys to the Vatican are probably slim to none. They would have more, but you can't. The average person just can't get into those vaults and take a look at it. So what we have on display here is a significant collection, and it's actually, hour and a half or so from here today. This was in Colorado Springs, but we're in Santa Clarita today, north of LA, where the exhibit opened about 2-3 weeks ago in a location up there. So you can look up Passages under the website is explorepassages.com, and it gives you more information there. This particular exhibit gave us an opportunity to put an exhibit in some international location. The first one that we did was at the Vatican in 2012. So we opened this in 2011. It was 2012 when we put our first exhibit at the Vatican, and we called it Verbum Domini. They asked us to come back the next year, and we said, give us a breather. And we went back last year in 2014, and this is the exhibit at the Vatican, called it Verbum Domini 2. And we're there during the spring, and we had counted over 100 people from over 100 nations that came through to see this exhibit. So we've had great exposure for the exhibit that we had there at the Vatican. Now, the first exhibit we had, the Pope at that time was Pope Benedict, if you may recall. And in 2012, he made a trip to Cuba. And we were told while he was in Cuba that in more than one occasion, he was making the comment to the leadership in Cuba that maybe this exhibit, that he would open his windows each morning and see this across the plaza, because his apartment was on the other side of the plaza there, and saw our banners there, that maybe this exhibit would come to Cuba. And so we just have a theory that if the Pope is plugging your exhibit, you need to check into it. So made a trip down to Cuba, not thinking it was going to, work out, but doors started opening, and we actually were able to have this exhibit at the National Cathedral in Havana in Cuba last year for 22 days. We had over 30,000 people that came through there. This is an opening ceremony where they did a phenomenal presentation of the arts, telling the story of the Bible from Genesis to Revelations, in art, in music, dance, singing, a phenomenal production. The lady that sang the Via Dolorosa could sing in just about any place here in America. She did a phenomenal job. And what we found out later was it was the Catholic and the Protestant churches coming together to put that production on. And later I'm sitting there thinking, this exhibit took the American government's approval and the Cuban government's approval, and it was the Catholics and the Protestants coming together to put this together. I don't think there's anything besides the Bible that could have done that. That is the power of this book that we celebrate. So that was in Cuba last year as well. We also had an exhibit in Jerusalem at the Bible Lands Museum, which is in the parking lot of the Israeli Museum. It's a privately ran museum. That's Amanda Weiss, the executive director of the museum, and you probably recognize that's Mike Huckabee, as he was taking a tour to Israel, came in and went through the exhibit, and standing by a replica of the Gutenberg Press, which we have at the exhibit, Passage exhibit here in Santa Clarita. We had it there. It was opened in October of 2013, and it was doing so well, we were going to be there 6-8 months. They asked us to extend it, so we were there for a full year, closing down October of this last year. So those are some of the traveling exhibits that have developed, one of the pillars of the four, and there are other exhibits that we are considering and looking into, discussed with China and Argentina and South Korea and other opportunities. But our focus has really become the museum, and that's we're seeing some activity there. We have a location in Washington, D.C., which is where we're going to, the permanent museum will be, and it is a couple blocks south of the Air and Space Museum. There at the bottom where it says the 300D Street, that is where our location is going to be. And it shows that it's depending on how you count it, just a few blocks there from the Capitol. As a matter of fact, it's off there we go, from that 300D Street there on the bottom. And if you go from the corner to the corner of where the Air and Space Museum is, it's just basically 2 blocks north of the Air and Space Museum, which was the second most attended museum last year in D.C. And so we are excited about the location there. We are also in the block where we are, we have a metro stop that comes up. Federal Center Southwest, I believe, is what that stop is called. So 2 blocks from the second most attended museum, right at a metro stop, is where the museum will be. There's 2 buildings there. It's the building on the left. The building on the right is a Washington Office Center, and it will continue to be an office center. The building on the left was expanded, so the center section was actually added later, and then the office building on the right was added. If you were to go today, as of the last week or two, that center section has come all the way down to the ground. So we are under construction, and we will be taking out every other floor. The roof is off of the original building, and we're taking out every other floor. But it's been designated, we designated it as a historical building, so the exterior, we will actually make it look more like what it did originally. So a great location. We're excited about the facility there. And there's 3 main stories that we're telling in the museum. We look at this book in 3 different ways. One of those ways is what is the history of this book? How did we get this book in the form that we have today? And so we want to look at the archaeological evidence and the manuscript evidence for this book, and that is what this floor's focus is. The next floor is the narrative floor. We are probably more ignorant of this book than we have ever been because we don't teach it as we once did. So while over 90% of the homes in this country have a Bible on their shelf based on the survey that we did, we are probably more ignorant than ever. So we have to start from scratch. And we think the very first place that people need to start with is a basic understanding of the story of this book. You don't have to like it, you don't have to believe it, but you ought to know the story, and that's what the narrative floor is. What Mark and Roma had, 13 hours on the History Channel to do, we have one floor of the museum to tell the Bible story from Genesis to Revelations. And then the third floor is the impact. This book speaks into every area of life, and it has impacted every area of life in ways that the average person probably doesn't fully appreciate. And so the goal here is to show that. Whatever the area of life, whether it's government, the economy, business, family, science, art, literature, music, in all these areas, this book has had an impact. And what we are striving to do is to show that impact of this book. You know, we have hospitals today, by and large, because of this book. We have colleges today, by and large, because of this book. We have freedoms today because of this book, and we could go on and on. And so we want to show that this book has had an impact on people's lives. Now, people will argue that this book has been the scourge of the earth, and I've got some letters that kind of indicate that. Created all the wars and on and on. And yes, man has used this book for his own selfish ill intent. But don't blame the book for when man misuses it. You might remember a guy named Jim Jones took a bunch of people down to Ghana and said, drink the Kool-Aid. Don't blame the book because he misused it. Hitler would use this book if it served his purposes, but don't blame the book for his misuse of it. When we appropriately apply the principles taught in this book in any area of life, what I think we will find out is that it has been good for mankind. And that's what the goal is of this floor. And then the final leg is education. Because we have scholars that we're working with, because we will have the museum, we've got a collection, it just makes sense that we provide education for people to understand this book better. Our goal is the American public schools, and that really helped me understand some fence posts. There are certain limits that we have. This is not a faith venture. It's more of a fact venture. We just want to present the facts, and our visitors to the museum have to make their own choice. And we feel like it's important for people to basically know the facts of this book. To be ignorant of this book is a disservice, I think, to American kids. When our government's basic principles are built on its teachings. The idea that all men are created equal is two biblical concepts right there. The fact that we're created, that's a biblical concept. You don't have to agree with it, but our founders built this nation off of biblical concept. The fact that we're created equal is a biblical concept. If our founders were Hindu, would they embrace all men are created equal? Well, they wouldn't, because that's not a part of the Hindu worldview. So it's a biblical concept that our nation was built upon. And to be ignorant of this book is to be ignorant of our state. It's to be ignorant of the church and the state. So we believe that it's important that people understand the basics of this book. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. But you ought to know about it. Now, in the year 2000, Life magazine had a publication that came out that had the 100 most important events for a millennium. For 1,000 years, what were the most important events of a millennium? Here are the top 10 that they came up with. The compass goes to sea. Hitler comes to power. So, good or bad. The Declaration of Independence, gunpowder weapons, germ theory, Galileo's telescope, the Industrial Revolution, Luther, Knox, Columbus's voyage. Can you imagine these not being taught in our schools? Germ theory ought to be part of our science course. The Industrial Revolution, Luther, Knox, Columbus's voyage, obviously we need to talk about that. The Declaration of Independence, we ought to know about these things. These are events that have impacted our world. Guess what number one was? For 1,000 years, the most impactful event. Now, they say important, but when it says Hitler comes to power, I don't know how important that was. But was it impactful? Yes. It was an impactful event for our world. But number one was Gutenberg prints the Bible. It wasn't Gutenberg Press. It was Gutenberg prints the Bible. That changed our world, unlike any of those others, based on Life magazine. And I could show you others that have indicated that as well. Not to teach this book, I'm not interested in teaching faith. It's not about faith. It's not about faith tradition. It's not about a church. It's about a book. Set your faith aside. Let's just learn about this book. Let's learn about how it has impacted our world. And you make your choice what you do with it. But I believe we ought to know about it. I've got a quote here, and I want to ask you two questions. Do you agree with it, and who would have said it? The King James Bible of 1611, the Authorized Version, includes passages of outstanding literary merit in its own right. For example, the Song of Songs and the Sublime Ecclesiastes, which I'm told is pretty good in the original Hebrew too. But the main reason the English Bible needs to be part of our education is that it is a major source book for literary culture. Now notice they're using literary culture as their excuse. Is this some evangelical just trying to slip the Bible into the schools and that is their excuse? And do you agree with it? Or do you say, no, that opens up a Pandora's box and we've got to put everybody else's in there? This is actually Richard Dawkins in his book, The God Delusion. And after he says this, he gives over 100 examples of how our language comes from the King James Version of the Bible. Now, an example of that is I was on a CNN segment showing some of our artifacts. In the segment before me, it was a story of a Good Samaritan, person acting as a Good Samaritan. They did not explain the Good Samaritan story. Joe Blow acted as a Good Samaritan. If you don't know the Good Samaritan story, you just lost the context of that story. That's what Richard Dawkins is saying. I was watching the movie Lady in Gold that's out right now, talking about the artwork that was stolen, and the lady was trying to get back her piece of artwork, and it was from Austria, and she was asked, because she fled Austria, and she was asked, did you ever go back to Austria? And she made the comment, I'm not like Lot's wife, I didn't look back. Now, if you don't know what that story's all about, I don't know what she just said. So again, that is an example of what Richard Dawkins is arguing. We believe that we ought to know this book, and that's why we're developing a curriculum that uses the same three criteria that we're looking at this book in for the museum. It's basically its history, its impact, and its narrative. And the desire is to have that in the public schools. Now, the title is The Secret Behind Hobby Lobby's Success. I can tell you just quickly, we do the best we can to follow the principles that this book teaches. And that's why we want to teach it and to share it with as many people as we can. That, I believe, is what the secret to our success is. I've got a final video here to share a little, sum up what we've been talking about.
The Bible, as a historical artifact, if we look at it just in that way, is vital to understanding Western culture.
The Bible as a book is more than just a transmission of a narrative or an oral history or any kind of literary tradition.
It is, in essence, the book of all books. It's the best-selling book of all time. It still has more impact than any other book ever written.
The Bible's significant not because it's talking about itself, but because it's pointing beyond itself.
When we first got started, we were just looking at buying an artifact or two, and we kept having opportunities being presented, and we just kept buying. Today, we have over 40,000 items in the collection.
This is not a small-time operation. The breadth of the collection is kind of breathtaking.
Mr. Green's vision is actually the fruition of what people have been dreaming about for decades.
This is about the Bible. It's not about a faith tradition or a church or a denomination. It's about a book.
We're trying to present the biblical narratives in a clear, objective, just descriptive way, because people just don't even know the stories.
And part of the history we're trying to tell is to do justice to the wide range of people who have claimed this book as their own, who have participated in its survival, who have had their lives changed by it.
Some of the exciting objects that we have that people would recognize are, of course, our Dead Sea Scroll fragments.
Papyrus 39, it's a fragment from the Gospel of John, found at the site of Oxyrhynchus. It is from a passage in John 8, and with its 3rd century date, that papyrus is the earliest surviving witness for that passage in John.
We have one of the largest collections in private hands of Torah scrolls.
And it's really an incredible conflation of all the Jewish communities throughout Europe, Middle East, and North Africa.
The collection contains just about every significant biblical imprint that has ever been printed in America.
These artifacts, which deserve to be studied, are being made available at a high rate for the people who have spent years of their lives acquiring the understanding to learn from them.
There's just moments of awe. The wealth of information that they have provided related to the Bible, its transmission, its history, is completely unparalleled.
Museums are a contemporary commentary on our culture.
So Washington, D.C. is a great location for us to be able to share this story with people all over the world.
Putting ourselves in the middle of that holds us to quite a high standard and says that we're willing to engage on that level.
To have the Museum of the Bible there as a part of that overall culture adds to the commentary of who we are.
I really hope that this museum will impact people of all faiths, all ethnicities, young, old, that it will spark a curiosity in their hearts and their souls.
So I'm rather bold about asking people to get involved. We hope this is an encouragement to people.
If we can bring a greater awareness to our world of this book and its potential impact, that is an exciting venture to be on.